Okay, good morning, check 25B. Make sure you're tracking your reaction quizzes this week. It is a video, so make sure you're on top of that. It deals with Vietnam. I will try to get through all the lecture today. I'll probably go at a pretty good pace. Make sure you're paying attention. Some of these things could help you greatly on Quiz Bowl.
Yeah,
Zach.
Really. Who would have known some Vietnam
Now, that being said, we're going to talk about the Vietnam War now. Old and new left challenged not only mainstream America but also what it dismissively called the old left. So basically, the Democratic Party is going to split into old and new. They're going to reject mainstream concepts, spoke of loneliness, isolation, and alienation created by the prosperity of the 50s. Many were in college and the rise of student activism. Essentially, they were bored. They didn't like what they've been told. They challenged the status quo. They will be educated, but they kind of want to change stuff. The fading consensus. In 1940s, 1950s, as a product of World War II, there was a great consensus on what roles and how society should be operating. That will change in the 60s. Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, there was an offshoot of the Socialist League for Industrial Democracy. They capture the mood and summarize the beliefs of this generation of students, protesters, and the Port Huron Statement, which the Port Huron Statement said offered a new vision of a social change. We seek the establishment, it proclaimed, of democracy of individual participation in which the individual shares in those social divisions determine the quality and direction of life. What this basically says is people are going to start challenging what they've been told is right and wrong. Okay? We studied the 50s and 60s enough to know the 50s, pretty much everyone fell into place. They didn't challenge authority, but the 60s, everything's going to be turned on its head. And it's going to primarily start Vietnam and the New Left too, with America and Vietnam. And that's going to be the catalyst that really transforms America. Now, you have the civil rights movement going on, but really what kickstarts all the changes in America starts and ends with Vietnam. By 1964, the black movement and the emergence of the New Left shattered the climate of consensus of the 50s, but what transformed was the rebellion against Vietnam. The war revealed the tragic view in the world in either or lens, meaning you're either communist or you're or democracy. After the French led Vietnam, the U.S. supported all aspects of this corrupt South Vietnam government, who was headed by a Catholic known as Diem. Now, there was fears that voters would not forgive them for losing Vietnam, so they basically said, if we don't go into Vietnam, voters are going to be mad. So it was an all-out operation. South Vietnamese leader Ngo Dinh Diem was so bad the U.S. allowed a military coup in '63 to remove him. He was killed. We didn't necessarily want him killed, but we allowed for him to be overthrown, which they killed him. Now, what made him a bad leader for South Vietnam was he was Catholic. And Vietnam was predominantly Buddhist. And this didn't mesh well with the population. He was corrupt. He was power hungry. And so when he is removed, we knew it was going to happen. We allowed it to happen. Now, Vietnam becomes Lyndon Johnson's war. The president after Kennedy. Johnson came to the presidency with little experience in foreign relations, but was aware of Republicans had used the Truman lost China as a weapon against Truman, and ultimately led to the 52, the Republicans retaking the White House. Gulf of Tonkin resolution allowed the president to give power to go into Vietnam in 1964. There was a slight little incident in which an American destroyer in the Gulf of Tonkin came upon a Vietnamese fishing boat, and they said they were fired upon and all this, and basically it was a smokescreen. It was just an excuse to go into Vietnam. We did go into the Dominican Republic and an intervention brief, and it was successful. But our primary attention is going to be in Vietnam. By '68, the number of Americans had exceeded 500,000, over 500,000. The war turned into a brutal and spread of chemicals to destroy forests, and napalm bombs will have long-lasting effects, including on my father, who they have traced his prostate cancer back to Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam. Now, here's a map showing you the South and the North. Now, you can see a lot of major events in Vietnam. The problem with Vietnam was the North Vietnamese forces primarily came what was called the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a secret trail that ran between Cambodia and Laos. And so they were constantly infiltrating South Vietnam, and they pop up. They were called Viet Cong. And obviously, ethnically, the North and the South Vietnamese are the same, right? You're not going to tell friend from foe, making it very hard to fight this war. Now, as this drags on, there's going to become an anti-war movement back home. The Cold War foreign policy consensus against communism across the board is going to start to unravel. By '68, the war had sidetracked much of the Great Society and torn families, universities, the Democratic Party itself apart. With college students exempted from the draft, the burden of fighting fell on the working class and the poor. Astronomically high was the poor, and a lot of African Americans are going to be drafted. By '67, young men were burning their draft cards or fleeing to Canada to avoid fighting in what they concluded was an unjust war. 100,000 anti-war press assembled at the Lincoln Memorial. So there's a lot of growing animosity towards the war now. The counterculture, the New Left's Freedom Initiative, centered on participatory democracy. As the '60s progressed, young Americans understanding freedom wanted to expand their cultural freedom as well. They were flamboyantly reject reasonable, respectable norms of their elders. They're going to challenge the status quo across the board. Self-indulgence, self-destructive behavior will built into the counterculture. Thus, the hippie movement will be born. Drug experimentation, living loosely, everything is going to come about as a rejection of what had been established. Vietnam and the New Left 4. Personal liberation and the free individual. The famed trio of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. They're going to do it. They were told not to do it in the 50s. Now they're going to do it full revolt. Search for a way of life in which friendship and pleasure eclipse the single-minded pursuit of wealth. Rock festivals like Woodstock will pop up. The point of this is that it's all about living for the moment, having fun, and really embracing what they enjoy. That being said, what's going to happen is a lot of this generation by the 70s will calm down. A lot of the hippie movements, a lot of these people who were trying to live this certain lifestyle realized by the 70s it wasn't sustainable, and they're going to go back to normal lives. You come across, and you see it in the movies sometimes portrayed like Meet the Parents and others, or I think it's Meet the Folkers actually, but like they talk about, oh, I had my hippie period. And if you see it all the time where you hear like people that are 60 in their 60s now, they'll say, yeah, I had my hippie period. But then they settle down and they were very successful, right? A lot of them. And then what the point of this was this generation, now some of them never left it, or some went crazy like Charles Manson, by the way, serial killer, right? Or, yeah, Helter Skelter. But it was a phase, and people went through it and they kind of moved on. Not everyone did, but most did. Faith and counterculture, growing split in the church between liberals and conservatives. 60s also witnessed Eastern religions coming in, like Hinduism, Buddhism, and other experimentations religion coming into the country.
In the church. I thought religion and politics shouldn't go together.
Well, what happens is, this isn't necessarily politics, this is culture. The church is going to split over how to deal with it, or what the way forward is. Like, they wanted to reform the church. And even the church today is going through some reforms on certain issues. Or splitting, I should say, not reforms. A picture from Woodstock. I don't think I need to summarize that too much. You can see basically a giant concert that lasted, I don't know, what was it, a month or two? It was super long. New movements in the rights revolution. Now, new sushi. Never get gas station sushi, by the way. Make you sick. Or get sushi right now during this whole flood thing, because who knows where it came from. Okay. Come on, I'm trying to make, I mean, it's pretty serious, but I wouldn't go get, are you making fun of me that I caught my peanut and ate it?
Have you had gas station sushi before?
No.
Oh.
But I always like that commercial. Is it a Geico commercial? It says never get gas station sushi. Because then the next scene he's like barfing somewhere. If you like sushi, power to you, but... Okay. New social movements developed or dotted the 60s. The feminine mystique. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique was painted a devastating picture of talented, educated women trapped in a world basically where they could not reach their goals or basically live a life, right? They're trapped.
Isn't that a book?
It is. The Feminine Mystique is a book, but what it painted was, I'm using the word illustrated, is probably a better word, but it painted a picture when you read the book of like how desperate some of these wives felt trapped at home. She got letters from female readers relating how the suburban nightmare where they were stay at home, they were always trapped doing mom jobs and not being able to pursue a career. The law slowly began to address feminist concerns. Equal Pay Act, Civil Rights Act of '64 actually covered women as well. And then you'll have the creation of NOW, Women's Organization in '66. Friedan was the president. So women are going to start to rebel on their stereotypical roles. And if you look into the 70s, you're going to see the rise of a strong feminist movement and really women focusing on television, workforce, like Mary Tyler Moore show is going to come out. You're going to see strong women finally starting to be portrayed. Women's liberation. Many women in the movement found themselves relegated to typing, cooking, and cleaning for male co-workers. So during a lot of this counterculture or other liberation movements, women are going to be relegated to the roles they've always been. By '67, women throughout the country were establishing consensus-raising groups to discuss the sources of their discontent. By '68, this is actually kind of an interesting one, Miss American Beauty Pageant, which still goes on today, is where they filled a trash can with objects of oppression. Media invented the term bra burners. I don't know if they actually threw any bras in there and burned them, but this is where at this Miss American pageant they're going to throw things that they said was an oppression, and one of them, I think one was thrown in there, but a bra was set on fire or thrown in there, and so they're basically burning their bras because they're putting off this stereotypical role they've been in. The new movements and the right revolution too. Gay liberation emerges. The movement of gay liberation will emerge in the 60s, long viewed as sinful and mentally disordered. Most states had laws against them. Staying in the closet was very prominent. Stonewall in raid fought back against the police, and I think a few individuals will be killed. One thing to understand, it gains steam here but doesn't go full bore. Gay liberation or gay rights will start to expand in the early 80s, but then the AIDS epidemic will crash that. It's not till the 2000s and really today that gay rights have expanded. And there's still a lot of debate about how far or what should be included, not included, etc. on it. The 2014-15 court case, Ugenfeld for something like that versus someone, which legalized gay marriage, is probably the most prominent one on recent memory. Latino activism, similar to Black Power, emphasized pride in both Mexico and the past new Chicano culture. So there'll be activism by Hispanics at this time for equal rights and a stance. Red Power is not communist, it's upsurge of Native Americans. Termination policy of Truman Eisenhower of closing reservations and integrating Indians was abandoned. American Indian movement will spring up. They tried to get Indians off reservations and kind of get them cultured, but that's going to ultimately fail. But there's going to be a pride resurgence in the Native Americans. It's going to be called the Red Movement. The new movements and rights revolution 3. Environmental and the consumer movement. Growing concerns over nature and the products used. It's the mid to late 60s that they finally start realizing, hey, we're killing turtles, we're killing ourselves, we're destroying rainforests. Hey, we should probably stop doing that. Clean Air and Clean Water Acts will be passed. The Endangered Species Act, April 22nd, 1970, the first Earth Day. So you see a consensus movement to try to protect the Earth. Ralph Nader, work on exposing auto manufacturers' high dangerous vehicles will make him famous. He'll win a lawsuit, get a lot of money, and then he'll run for president in 2000. The rights revolution under the guidance of Chief Justice Earl Warren vastly expanded the rights enjoyed by all Americans, placed them beyond the reach of legislative and local majorities. New York Times versus Sullivan, 1964, created the modern constitutional law of freedom of the press. This court case basically said where the press freedom was at and really affirmed it. Loving versus Virginia overturned interracial marriage laws. What this did was a black woman and a white man got married, and they were imprisoned because they broke the law. But Loving versus Virginia, and their last name was Loving, they won the court case, and they were now interracial marriage will be allowed across the board. Miranda rights. A Hispanic was arrested for a murder, which I think they were guilty, but they were not read their rights. Like, you have the right to remain silent and all this because he didn't understand what was going on. And from the Miranda rights, we get that you basically know anything you can say. It's just basically giving you your rundown of your rights. Police officers have to do that if they arrest you. Engel versus Vitale. Prayer violated the First Amendment in schools. Prayer could remain in schools, but it could not be dictated or mandatory. You can still pray in school. It just cannot. I can't lead it. Okay. Right to privacy. Griswold versus Connecticut, which overturned a state law prohibiting the use of contraceptives. What this basically they linked privacy to the sanctity of marriage. Basically, what that said was you could not ban anything in the home that would you can't, like I said, you can't use contraceptives. You have to use contraceptives. You have to be bathed while you're you have to be clothed while you bathe and all this, like some crazy laws like that. What this said was what's in the home. There's a privacy of the home. Okay, you have some freedom within your home. Roe versus Wade, though, is a big one here. Created a constitutional right to terminate pregnancy up to, I think, was it 3 months. And there's other court cases that kind of strengthen or weaken Roe versus Wade, but it's up to 3 months is what Roe versus Wade allowed, that you had a right to an abortion. Okay, 1968. 1968. This is the one that when you watch the video, kind of hits home. It's the year that everything falls apart. It's a year of turmoil. And honestly, 68 was probably the worst year in American history. If you had to pinpoint one year in American history that it seemed like everything might unravel, it was 68. 60s reached its climax. January of 1968, the Tet Offensive. If you remember when my father came in, he talked about this. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops launched a well-organized uprising in cities throughout South Vietnam. Very well-orchestrated attack. Militarily, it was a disaster. Americans stopped him. South Vietnamese forces stopped it, and they were beaten back. Thousands of Viet Cong and North Vietnamese troops died in this. However, it shattered public confidence in Johnson's administration. Images on TV of it. We were winning the war, and everything was going great, and then all of a sudden the Tet Offensive happens.
So which side were we on?
The South.
We were on the South?
Yeah.
Because the Viet Cong and them, they hid in the cities.
Yep. And that's what made it difficult was because the Viet Cong looked like South Vietnamese. Yeah. And what ends up happening is after the news crews are there to capture the Tet Offensive, and now we don't believe the government. They're lying to us. It's not accurate. Johnson announced he would not seek re-election. He realized he would not win re-election. And so the Tet Offensive, now you start to see in body counts of American or Army generals said if we push the dead body counts of the dead, we killed 10,000 Viet Cong today. But it just was a disastrous PR nightmare. And the Army still always takes lessons. We do not want to repeat Vietnam. April 4th in Memphis, Martin Luther King Jr. will be assassinated.
May I have your attention, please? This is a drill for an internal intruder. I repeat, this is a drill for our internal intruder procedure. This is a drill for an internal intruder.
We will pause the video. You can read the rest of the notes. We're going to stop. We have a drill, so sorry.